The council chambers were designed to make smaller species feel insignificant. Admiral Sarah Chen stood alone at the center of the vast circular room, surrounded by towering representatives from a dozen alien civilizations. Each one looked down at her with barely concealed contempt. Above her head, holographic displays showed the burning wreckage of Andromeda Station. 2 million souls had died in the attack just 6 hours ago. The Velcros Dominion had struck without warning. Their fleet had torn through the Coalition's primary shipyards like a blade through paper. Now those same warships were regrouping at the edge of Coalition space, preparing for their final assault on the core worlds. Everyone in the chamber knew what that meant. Billions would die. Entire civilizations would be erased. High Counselor Vreth, a towering crystalline being whose species had mastered space travel when humans still lived in caves, broke the silence. His voice resonated through the chamber like breaking glass. The human had volunteered her fleet for combat operations. Again. It was the 5th time Earth had offered assistance in this war. And once again, the Council would have to explain why humanity's help was not needed. Admiral Chen waited patiently. She wore her dress uniform, crisp and dark blue, with silver stars on her shoulders. Her face showed no emotion. This only irritated Vreth more. Humans were supposed to be emotional creatures. They were supposed to be easy to read. But this woman stood like a statue, her hands clasped behind her back, her eyes fixed on the holographic display of devastation above her head. Another counselor spoke up. Ambassador Kreltok of the Havenian Union had witnessed the fall of 3 colony worlds to Velcros aggression. His blue skin had paled to almost white from stress. He addressed the human directly. They appreciated Earth's continued offers of military support. However, humanity's technology was generations behind Coalition standard. Their ships were slow. Their weapons were primitive. Their tactical thinking was rooted in planetary warfare, not the vast 3-dimensional battle space of modern naval combat. Chen's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. She had heard these words before. Every species in this chamber had studied Earth's military history. They had seen the wars, the countless brutal wars. Humans fought each other with a ferocity that disturbed the more civilized races. But that same ferocity had never been properly channeled. Humanity had only been part of the Galactic Coalition for 30 years. In galactic terms, they were infants. Dangerous infants, perhaps, but infants nonetheless. A third voice joined the conversation. Commander Zalneth, representing the Coalition Defense Fleet, was more direct. The human vessels lacked energy shields. They relied on physical armor plating, which was considered obsolete. Their primary weapons were kinetic projectiles and chemical explosives, technology that most species had abandoned thousands of years ago. In a modern space battle, human ships would be torn apart in minutes. It would be a massacre. The Coalition could not in good conscience send humanity to its death. Chen finally spoke. Her voice was quiet but clear. She understood the Council's concerns. Earth's technology was indeed different from Coalition standard. Their ships were built with different design philosophies. Their weapons operated on different principles. But perhaps the Council was making assumptions. Perhaps they were judging human capabilities based on incomplete information. Vreth's crystalline form seemed to glow brighter with annoyance. Was the human suggesting that the Council did not understand warfare? The Coalition had been fighting wars when humanity was still figuring out how to make fire. Their military academies had refined the art of space combat over tens of thousands of years. They understood the mathematics of orbital mechanics, the physics of energy weapons, the complex ballet of fleet maneuvers in zero gravity. What could humanity possibly teach them? Nothing, Chen replied. Humanity could teach them nothing. But humanity could perhaps show them something. Something about warfare that could not be learned in academies or simulations. Something that could only be understood through experience, through survival. The chamber fell silent. The holographic displays continued to show the carnage at Andromeda Station. Debris fields, burning hulls, escape pods scattered like seeds in the wind. In the distance, sensors tracked the Velcros fleet. 300 warships, each one larger and more powerful than anything in the Coalition arsenal. They were preparing to jump to the next system. To the next massacre. Kreltok leaned forward. His voice was gentler now. He understood what Chen was implying. Humans had a reputation across the galaxy. They were survivors. Their homeworld was a death trap by galactic standards: heavy gravity, violent weather, aggressive predators, deadly diseases. Most species could not survive a single day on Earth without extensive life support. Yet humans had not only survived but thrived. They had turned their hostile planet into a fortress. But survival instincts did not translate to military effectiveness, Zalneth countered. The Velcros Dominion fought with honor and precision. They followed the established rules of galactic warfare. Their fleet commanders had studied at the finest military institutions. They understood strategy and tactics at the highest level. Raw aggression was not enough to defeat such an enemy. Chen's expression did not change. She simply asked a question. What if the rules were wrong? What if the established conventions of galactic warfare were themselves a weakness? What if the Velcros were exploiting those very conventions? The council chamber erupted in protests. How dare she suggest that galactic military doctrine was flawed? These strategies had been developed over millennia. They had been tested in countless conflicts. They represented the accumulated wisdom of hundreds of civilizations. To dismiss them was arrogance of the highest order. Vreth raised a crystalline hand for silence. He studied the human admiral for a long moment. The attacks on Andromeda Station had been devastating, precisely because the Velcros had not followed established protocols. They had not issued a formal declaration. They had not allowed civilians to evacuate. They had simply appeared and opened fire. It was barbaric. It was uncivilized. But it had been devastatingly effective. Perhaps, Vreth suggested slowly, the Council was indeed operating under outdated assumptions. Perhaps the Velcros had studied their enemy too well. They knew the Coalition would never strike first. They knew evacuation protocols would be honored. They knew fleet deployments would be predictable. So they had simply ignored all the rules and caught everyone unprepared. Chen saw her opening. Humanity understood this type of warfare. Earth had seen countless conflicts where rules were discarded, where surprise and brutality trumped honor and tradition, where survival mattered more than dignity. Humans had learned hard lessons in blood and fire. They had learned that sometimes the only way to stop a predator was to become something more dangerous. The council members looked at each other. The situation was desperate. 300 Velcros warships were massing for their final assault. Coalition forces were scattered and demoralized. Shipyard capacity had been cut by 70%. Without Andromeda Station, they could not replace losses. They could not repair damaged vessels. In 6 months, maybe less, the Coalition would collapse. Kreltok spoke again. What exactly was Earth proposing? Chen's answer was simple. Give her fleet a target, a specific mission, something the Coalition considered impossible, something that would normally be classified as a suicide run. Humanity would take the assignment, and they would complete it. Or they would die trying. Zalneth pulled up tactical displays. He showed Chen the Velcro staging area, a massive concentration of ships in the outer reaches, a region of space filled with radiation and gravitational anomalies. The Velcros had chosen their position well. Any conventional attack would be detected days in advance. The defenders would have time to prepare, to form proper battle lines to coordinate their response. By the time Coalition forces arrived, they would face a fully prepared enemy with every advantage. Chen studied the data. She asked about the timeline. Zalneth explained that the Velcros would move within 48 hours. They were waiting for reinforcements from their outer colonies. Once those arrived, they would have overwhelming numerical superiority. Nothing could stop them then. The core worlds would fall within a month. The Admiral asked for one more piece of information. Could the Council buy her time? Could they create a distraction? Draw attention away from the outer reaches? Vreth considered this. Perhaps. There were still Coalition forces near the border. They could stage false movements, create sensor echoes, make it appear that a major offensive was being prepared elsewhere. Chen nodded slowly. That would be sufficient. The Council would have their mission. Earth's fleet would strike the Velcro staging area. They would engage the enemy fleet directly, and they would do so before reinforcements arrived. The mission parameters were clear. Destroy the Velcro's fleet, prevent them from reaching Coalition space, or fail completely. Vreth's form dimmed slightly. He had seen the projections. No fleet in the Coalition could accomplish what Chen was proposing. The Velcros had too many ships, too much firepower, too strong a defensive position. This was not a military operation. It was a death sentence, he asked Chen directly. Did she understand what she was agreeing to? Did her crew understand? Chen's eyes remained fixed on the tactical display. She understood perfectly. So did her crew. Every human in her fleet had volunteered for this mission. They knew the odds. They knew what success would require. But they also knew something the Council did not. Something that could not be explained in briefings or tactical assessments. Humanity did not know how to quit. It was not part of their nature. When cornered, humans did not surrender. They did not negotiate. They fought with everything they had. With weapons, with tools, with their bare hands if necessary, and when fighting was not enough, they became creative. They improvised. They adapted. They found ways to win that no other species would even consider. The Council took a vote. It was not unanimous. Several members objected to sending humans into what they saw as certain death. But desperation won the day. The motion passed. Earth's fleet would be given their mission. They would receive what little support the coalition could provide. Encrypted communications, intelligence data, safe passage through coalition space, but no reinforcements, no backup. No rescue if things went wrong. Chen saluted. The gesture looked strange to alien eyes, this rigid positioning of the hand, but there was something in it that transcended culture. A promise. A commitment. She would complete her mission or she would die. There was no third option. As she left the council chambers, Kreltok followed her. He caught up to her in the corridor outside. He had to ask, was Chen afraid? Did she truly believe her fleet could accomplish this impossible task? Or was this simply human pride? The inability to admit defeat? Chen stopped and turned to face him. Her expression finally changed. A small smile touched her lips. It was not a pleasant smile. It reminded Kreltok of a predator showing its teeth. She told him that fear was natural. Fear kept you alert. Fear kept you alive. But fear was not the same as defeat. Humanity had faced extinction more times than the Council knew. Asteroid impacts, ice ages, supervolcanoes, pandemics, nuclear war. Every time they had survived. Every time they had adapted. Every time they had emerged stronger. The Velcros were just another extinction event. Just another threat to survival. And like every threat before them, they would learn a hard truth. Humanity did not just survive. Humanity thrived on adversity. The worse things became, the more dangerous humans became in response. Chen walked away, leaving Kreltok standing alone in the corridor. He watched her go, then returned to the council chamber. He found Vreth standing before the tactical displays, studying the human fleet composition. Kreltok asked the High Counselor what he was thinking. Vreth did not answer immediately. When he finally spoke, his voice was very quiet. They had made a terrible mistake, perhaps not in accepting Earth's offer, but in how they had perceived humanity all this time. They had seen primitive technology and assumed primitive thinking. They had seen barbaric history and assumed barbaric nature. But they had missed something crucial. Something that should have been obvious. Humans were not primitive. They were specialized. They had evolved on a world that tried to kill them every single day. They had developed not just to survive, but to dominate, to hunt, to fight, to win at any cost. And now the galaxy had given them a target. The Council had unleashed something that perhaps should have remained caged. Vreth looked at the tactical display one more time, at the 300 Velcros warships waiting in the outer reaches. He hoped they were ready for what was coming. Because ready or not, humanity was on its way. The bridge of the UHSV Indomitable was nothing like the sleek, pristine command centers of Coalition warships. There were no holographic displays floating in the air, no crystalline interfaces responding to thought commands. Instead, there were physical screens, mechanical switches, and keyboards. The crew sat at workstations that looked almost primitive by galactic standards. But everything worked. Everything had redundancy. And most importantly, everything could be repaired with basic tools and spare parts. Admiral Chen stood in the center of the bridge, her hands resting on the railing of the command platform. Around her, the fleet was making final preparations for the jump to the outer reaches. 47 ships. That was Earth's entire contribution to this war. 47 vessels against 300 Velcros warships. The numbers were insane. The mission was impossible. Yet not a single member of her crew had requested transfer. Not one person had suggested they reconsider. Commander James Rodriguez approached from the tactical station. He was Chen's second in command, a veteran of the resource wars that had nearly destroyed Earth in the 22nd century. He had seen humanity at its worst, billions dead from nuclear fire and biological weapons, entire regions rendered uninhabitable, but he had also seen humanity rebuild, adapt, learn from its mistakes. Rodriguez handed Chen a data tablet, the final intelligence report from coalition sources, Velcro's fleet composition, estimated weapons loadout, defensive formations. It made for grim reading. Each Velcro's capital ship outgunned the Indomitable by a factor of 3. Their energy shields could absorb more punishment than human armor could withstand. Their faster-than-light drives were more efficient, giving them better strategic mobility. Chen read through the data without comment. Then she handed the tablet back to Rodriguez and asked him a simple question. Did any of this change their plan? Rodriguez smiled grimly. Not in the slightest. The plan had never relied on matching the enemy ship for ship. That would be suicide. Instead, they would do what humans had always done when facing superior force. They would cheat. The Admiral called for a fleet-wide briefing. Every ship captain, every department head, every officer who would be making critical decisions in the coming battle. They assembled in virtual conference, their faces appearing on screens around the bridge. Chen recognized most of them. Some had served with her for decades. Others were younger, products of Earth's accelerated military training programs. But all of them shared one thing in common. They understood what was at stake. Chen did not waste time with speeches. She brought up a tactical display showing the Velcro staging area. The enemy had positioned themselves well. They occupied a region of space near a pulsar, using its intense radiation to mask their exact numbers and locations. Any attacking force would have to fight through electromagnetic interference. Sensors would be degraded. Communications would be difficult. Targeting would be imprecise. The Velcros thought this made them safe. They thought the radiation would protect them from surprise attack. But they had made assumptions based on coalition warfare doctrine. They expected enemy forces to announce themselves, to deploy into proper battle formations, to engage according to established protocols. The Velcros had studied their opponents well. Unfortunately for them, they had studied the wrong opponents. Chen explained the human approach. They would not announce themselves. They would not form battle lines. They would not follow any protocols that the Velcros might anticipate. Instead, they would use the pulsar's radiation to their advantage. Human ships were designed with heavy electromagnetic shielding. It made them heavier, slower, less efficient, but it also meant they could operate in environments that would blind coalition vessels. The fleet would approach from multiple vectors. They would use gravity assists from nearby stellar bodies to build velocity. By the time they reached the Velcro's position, they would be moving at speeds that made evasion nearly impossible. They would hit hard and fast like a hammer striking glass. The first the Velcros would know of their presence would be when kinetic rounds started tearing through their hulls. One of the younger captains spoke up. Captain Sarah Mills commanded the destroyer Princeton. She asked about the Velcro shields. Human kinetic weapons were effective against armor, but energy shields were designed to dissipate physical impacts. How would they overcome that advantage? Rodriguez answered before Chen could. They wouldn't overcome it. They would ignore it. The human fleet carried weapons that the coalition had banned as excessively destructive. Nuclear-pumped X-ray lasers, Kazaba howitzer warheads, kinetic impactors traveling at relativistic speeds. These were not precision weapons. They were not surgical instruments. They were hammers designed to crack fortresses. The Velcro's shields might stop conventional weapons, but they had not been designed to handle the concentrated fury of a nuclear detonation at close range. Chen continued the briefing. Phase 1 would involve the kinetic strike. Dozens of projectiles launched hours before the main fleet arrived. Simple chunks of dense metal, accelerated to a fraction of light speed. They would punch through the Velcro's formation like bullets through paper. The enemy would detect them too late to react. Ships would be crippled or destroyed before they even knew they were under attack. Phase 2 would be electronic warfare. This was where humanity's reputation for dirty fighting truly shined. Coalition species fought with honor. They did not hack enemy systems. They did not inject viruses or deploy logic bombs. Such tactics were considered beneath civilized beings. But humans had spent centuries perfecting the art of cyber warfare. Every conflict on Earth had seen nations attacking each other's infrastructure, corrupting data, seizing control of automated systems. The human fleet included specialized electronic warfare vessels. These ships carried nothing but computers, transmitters, and the most sophisticated hacking tools humanity could devise. While the Velcros were reeling from the kinetic strikes, these vessels would flood their networks with malicious code. Fire control systems would malfunction. Navigation computers would provide false data. Communication channels would be jammed or corrupted. The Velcros would find themselves fighting blind. Phase 3 would be the main engagement. Human ships closing to combat range while the enemy was still confused and disorganized. This was where the lack of energy shields became an advantage rather than a weakness. Coalition ships relied on their shields to protect them. When those shields failed, the ships underneath were often fragile, designed for speed and efficiency rather than durability. Human vessels were the opposite. They were built like tanks. Thick armor plating, redundant systems. Damage control teams trained to operate in the vacuum of space. The plan was simple in concept but brutal in execution. Overwhelming force applied without warning or mercy. No quarter given. No retreat allowed. The Velcros would have to be completely destroyed. Anything less would allow them to regroup, to adapt, to prepare for human tactics. This had to be decisive. This had to be final. Captain Mills asked another question. What about coalition observers? Earth had been assigned monitoring vessels to accompany the fleet. These ships would report back to the Council. Would they not object to human tactics? Would they not try to intervene? Chen's answer was blunt. The observers would see what happened. They would report everything, and the Council would have to decide whether they valued honor or results. The briefing continued for another hour. Every captain received specific assignments. Attack vectors were coordinated. Timing was synchronized down to the millisecond. Backup plans were established in case of system failures or unexpected enemy movements. By the time Chen dismissed the conference, every person in the fleet knew exactly what was expected of them. More importantly, they knew why it mattered. After the briefing ended, Rodriguez remained on the bridge. He stood beside Chen, both of them looking at the main view screen. It showed the fleet in formation, dozens of human warships preparing for the jump to faster-than-light travel. They looked small compared to coalition vessels. Ugly and utilitarian, but there was something purposeful about them. Something threatening. Rodriguez broke the silence. He asked Chen if she had thought about what would happen after the battle. Assuming they survived, assuming they succeeded, what would the galaxy think of humanity then? They were about to demonstrate levels of violence that would shock the coalition. They were going to show every civilized species in the galaxy just how brutal humans could be when pushed to their limits. Chen considered the question carefully. She admitted that she had thought about it. The coalition had treated humanity like children. Potentially dangerous children, but children nonetheless. After this battle, that would change. Fear would replace condescension. Other species would look at humans differently. They would see the capacity for organized destruction that had allowed humanity to dominate Earth. And they would wonder if humanity might someday turn that capacity against them. But that was a problem for tomorrow. Today, the galaxy needed humanity to be exactly what they were. Survivors, fighters, killers when necessary. The Velcros Dominion had chosen violence as their path. They had attacked civilians. They had broken every rule of civilized warfare. They had to be stopped, and stopped in a way that would discourage any other species from following their example. Rodriguez nodded slowly. He understood. This was not about glory or honor. This was about sending a message, about establishing a precedent. Any species that chose total war would face total destruction. Humanity would ensure that lesson was learned. They would write it in fire and steel across the stars. Future generations would remember what happened in the outer reaches. They would remember what humanity was capable of when provoked. The jump countdown began. Engineers verified faster-than-light drive systems. Navigation confirmed the route. Weapons officers prepared their systems. Damage control teams stood ready. Across the fleet, 47 ships and their crews made final preparations. Most of them would not return. They knew this. The odds were overwhelming. But not one of them hesitated. Chen thought about the Coalition Council, about Vreth and Kreltalk and all the others who had looked at humanity with such dismissive certainty. They thought they understood Earth. They had studied human history, human wars, human psychology. They had reached their conclusions based on data and analysis, but they had missed something fundamental, something that could not be captured in reports or databases. Humanity had been fighting for survival since the species first stood upright on the African savanna. Every day was a battle against nature, against predators, against each other. Other species had evolved on garden worlds protected by benevolent ecosystems. They had developed technology and civilization in relative peace. But Earth had been different. Earth had been hostile, and it had made humans something unique in the galaxy, not smarter than other species, not stronger or faster, but more stubborn, more adaptable, more willing to do whatever was necessary to survive. When coalition species faced extinction, they often accepted it with dignity. They prepared for the end with grace and resignation. But humans did not know how to accept defeat. When faced with extinction, they became more dangerous, not less. They fought harder, thought faster, took greater risks. The countdown reached 10 seconds. Shen activated the fleet-wide channel one last time. Her message was brief. She reminded them why they were here. 2 million souls lost at Andromeda Station. Billions more at risk if they failed. The future of the coalition. Perhaps the future of galactic civilization resting on their shoulders. It was too much responsibility for anyone, but someone had to bear it. And humanity had volunteered. She told them to remember their training, to trust their instincts, to fight not for glory or honor but for the survival of everyone counting on them, and most importantly to show the galaxy what humanity truly was. Not primitive, not barbaric, but perfectly evolved for one specific purpose: to survive, to endure, to win. The countdown reached 0. Space twisted. Reality bent. The human fleet vanished from coalition space, leaving behind only fading energy signatures and a handful of observer vessels. The observers would follow at a safe distance, their advanced sensors recording everything that happened. They would be witnesses to what came next. On the bridge of the Indomitable, Chen felt the familiar disorientation of faster-than-light travel. The journey would take 6 hours. 6 hours to reach the Velcro staging area. 6 hours to prepare for what would come after. She looked around at her bridge crew. Young faces, determined expressions. Every one of them had volunteered for this mission knowing they might not survive. Every one of them had chosen to fight anyway. Rodriguez stood beside her, arms crossed, eyes fixed on the navigation display. He was thinking about his family back on Earth. 3 children and 2 grandchildren. He had left them messages just in case. Told them he loved them. Told them he was proud of them. But he had not told them he was afraid. Fear was natural, but it could not be allowed to interfere with duty. The fleet traveled through the strange unreality of faster-than-light space. Hours passed. Systems were checked and rechecked. Weapons were armed. Crews rested when they could, knowing that once they dropped back into normal space, there would be no rest until the battle was over. One way or another, in a few hours, everything would be decided. The Velcros would learn what it meant to face humanity in total war. And the galaxy would never look at Earth the same way again. The Velcro staging area was a masterpiece of military positioning. Admiral Thekvon, commander of the Dominion fleet, had chosen this location personally. The pulsar bathed the entire region in intense electromagnetic radiation. Any approaching enemy would be detected by the interference they created in the radiation field. Their sensors would be degraded. Their communications would be disrupted. They would arrive blind and deaf, facing a prepared defense with every advantage. Thekvon stood on the command deck of his flagship, the Eternal Dominance. Around him, holographic displays showed the positions of all 300 warships under his command. They were arranged in defensive spheres, overlapping fields of fire, mutual support networks. Any attack from any direction would face coordinated resistance. The Velcros had studied coalition tactics for decades. They knew how the enemy would approach, how they would deploy, how they would fight. Victory at Andromeda Station had proven the superiority of Velcro strategy. The coalition had grown soft over millennia of peace. They followed rules. They honored traditions. They fought according to predictable patterns. All Thekvon had to do was ignore those patterns and exploit every weakness. The result had been a massacre. Now he simply had to wait for reinforcements, then proceed to the core worlds and repeat the process. His tactical officer approached. Lieutenant Veckrel was young but competent. He reported that long-range sensors were detecting unusual gravitational fluctuations. Nothing definite, but patterns that might indicate ship movements. Tekvon dismissed the concern. The pulsar created all kinds of sensor anomalies. The coalition would not dare attack this position. They lacked the numbers and the tactical advantage. Any assault would be detected days in advance, giving plenty of time to prepare. Still, Tekvon ordered increased vigilance. Scouts were sent to the edges of the formation. Sensor crews were instructed to filter out the pulsar's interference and focus on detecting any approaching vessels. Nothing would catch the Dominion fleet by surprise. They had learned from history. They had studied every major battle fought in the last 1,000 years. No one would repeat Andromeda Station against them. 14 minutes later, the first kinetic impactor struck. It was traveling at 40% of light speed. The Velcro sensors detected it 3 seconds before impact. Not enough time to react. Not enough time to even understand what was happening. The projectile was just a cylinder of depleted uranium, but at relativistic speeds it carried more energy than a nuclear warhead. It struck a Velcross cruiser amidships and punched completely through. The ship exploded. Not from the impact itself, but from the secondary reactions. Antimatter containment failed. Fusion reactors breached. Ammunition stores detonated. In less than 2 seconds, a warship that had survived a dozen battles simply ceased to exist. Debris expanded outward in a rapidly growing sphere. Fragments struck nearby vessels, causing minor damage and major confusion. Then the second impactor hit. Then the third. Then a dozen more in rapid succession. They came from different directions, different angles, making it impossible to predict where the next strike would land. Each one destroyed or crippled its target. Energy shields designed to deflect directed energy weapons were useless against solid projectiles moving at such incredible speeds. The Velcro's formation began to break apart as captains maneuvered desperately to avoid the invisible death falling from the sky. On the Eternal Dominance, Tekvon stared at his displays in disbelief. 17 ships lost in the first minute. No warning, no declaration of combat, no opportunity to respond. This was not how warfare was supposed to function. There were protocols. There were rules. You did not simply appear and start killing without giving the enemy a chance to surrender or negotiate. Becquerel was shouting reports, trying to track the incoming projectiles, trying to identify their source. But the pulsar's radiation made it impossible. The impactors were too small, too fast, too numerous. They had been launched hours ago, probably from beyond the range of Velcro sensors. Now they were simply falling through space, guided by the most basic targeting systems, relying on momentum rather than propulsion. Tekvon ordered all ships to activate maximum shielding and begin evasive maneuvers. But the formation was too tight. Ships designed to support each other were now in each other's way. Collisions became a danger as captains tried to avoid both the impactors and their fellow vessels. The carefully planned defensive arrangement collapsed into chaos in a matter of minutes. Then the electronic warfare began. It started subtly. A communications channel would drop. A sensor reading would flicker. Navigation systems would show minor discrepancies. Within seconds, the problems escalated. Fire control computers began targeting friendly vessels. Identification systems marked allies as enemies. Automated defense systems started firing at ghosts that did not exist. The Velcros had built their fleet using coalition technology. Standard systems, proven designs, but those systems had never been hardened against cyber attack. The very concept was considered dishonorable by galactic standards. No civilized species would attempt to hack enemy computers during battle. It was considered a form of cheating, like poisoning an opponent before a duel. Human cyber warfare specialists had been studying coalition network architecture for 30 years. They knew every weakness, every backdoor, every unpatched vulnerability. Now they exploited all of them simultaneously. Malicious code flooded through communication channels. Logic bombs activated in critical systems. Artificial intelligences that controlled ship operations found themselves fighting invisible opponents for control of their own hardware. Tekvon watched his fleet come apart. Ships were firing at each other now, convinced they were under attack from multiple directions. Communications were impossible. Orders could not be transmitted. Coordination was gone. Each vessel fought alone, blind and confused, while the kinetic impactors continued their merciless reign of destruction. Then the human fleet arrived. They came out of faster-than-light travel at multiple points around the Velcro's formation. Not in neat battle lines, but scattered across three-dimensional space. Each group of ships had specific targets, specific missions. They had studied the Velcros defensive positions. They knew where the command ships were, where the supply vessels hid, where the most dangerous weapon platforms waited. The human vessels opened fire immediately. No hails, no demands for surrender. Just weapons releasing their payloads with cold precision. Nuclear-pumped lasers carved through Velcros hulls. Missiles with shaped nuclear charges punched through shields that had been designed to stop energy weapons, not physical explosives. Railguns launched projectiles at velocities that made interception impossible. Admiral Chen watched the battle unfold from the bridge of the Indomitable. The main view screen showed a tactical overlay, colored icons representing ships, weapons, threats. It looked almost abstract, like a computer simulation, but each icon represented real vessels, real people, humans killing and dying, Velcros being systematically destroyed. This was not glorious. It was not heroic. It was simply necessary. Rodriguez provided running commentary from the tactical station. The Princeton had destroyed 3 Velcros frigates. The destroyer Moscow had taken damage but remained combat effective. The carrier Yorktown was launching drone swarms, overwhelming enemy point defense systems. Everywhere the humans attacked, Velcros ships died, but the Velcros were not helpless. As the initial shock wore off, some captains managed to organize responses. Groups of ships formed defensive clusters. Fire was concentrated on individual human vessels. The destroyer Wellington took multiple hits and went dark, its systems failing, its crew dead or dying. The frigate Canberra lost propulsion and drifted helplessly through the battle zone until a Velcros energy beam cut it in half. Chen noted the losses without emotion. They were within acceptable parameters. The mission was not to preserve the human fleet. The mission was to destroy the enemy. Every human ship lost was acceptable as long as it took multiple Velcros vessels with it. This was not a battle of maneuver or elegance. This was an exchange of mass and energy, a brutal calculation of who could inflict more damage before being destroyed themselves. The Indomitable closed with Thekvan's flagship. The Eternal Dominance was a massive vessel, 3 times the size of any human ship. Its weapons could have torn the Indomitable apart in a single volley, but it was also broadcasting on all frequencies, trying desperately to regain control of its compromised systems. Its shields flickered as power distribution networks failed under cyber attack. Its point defense batteries fired randomly, targeting empty space. Chen gave the order to fire. The Indomitable carried humanity's most powerful weapons, Kasaba howitzer warheads, nuclear-shaped charges that focus the energy of atomic detonations into coherent beams of plasma. 6 missiles launched. 6 nuclear fireballs erupted in rapid sequence. 6 beams of superheated matter struck the Eternal Dominance from different angles. The Velcros flagship's shields held for exactly 1.7 seconds. Then they collapsed. Armor vaporized. Internal structures melted. The ship broke apart. Its spine fractured, its compartments exposed to vacuum. Thekvan had time to register what was happening. Time to understand that his fleet was being destroyed. Time to realize that the enemy he faced did not fight by any rules he understood. Then the bridge lost atmosphere and everything went black. The death of the flagship had a profound effect on Velcros morale. Without central command, without coordination, individual ships began making their own decisions. Some tried to flee. Others attempted to surrender. A few decided to fight to the death, launching suicidal attacks against nearby human vessels. None of these choices mattered. The human fleet had been given specific orders. No survivors, no prisoners, no ships allowed to escape. Rodriguez tracked a group of Velcros transports trying to jump to faster-than-light travel. They were civilian ships pressed into military service, carrying supplies and support personnel. They posed no threat. They were running away, but orders were orders. The destroyer Princeton moved to intercept. Railgun fire disabled their drives. Then missiles finished the job. The transports exploded, adding more debris to the expanding field of wreckage. On the edge of the battle zone, coalition observer ships recorded everything. The crews watched in horrified silence as humanity demonstrated what total war actually meant. There was no honor here, no nobility, just systematic destruction executed with mechanical efficiency. The humans moved through the Velcros formation like harvesters through a field, cutting down everything in their path. Some Velcro ships managed to score hits on their attackers. The cruiser Berlin took a direct strike to its engineering section and lost half its propulsion. The frigate Seoul was caught between 3 enemy vessels and destroyed in seconds. The destroyer Mumbai's armor finally failed under sustained bombardment, and its hull ruptured, spilling atmosphere and crew into the void. But for every human ship destroyed, 10 Velcros vessels died. The battle lasted 4 hours and 17 minutes from first strike to final kill. In that time, 300 Velcros warships were reduced to scrap metal and ionized gas. Not a single vessel escaped. Not one crew survived to tell their people what had happened. The human fleet paid heavily for this victory. 11 ships destroyed. 23 more damaged badly enough to require extensive repairs. Over 15,000 humans dead, but the mission was accomplished. The Velcros threat was eliminated. Their fleet would not reach Coalition core worlds. Their carefully planned invasion had ended before it could begin, and every species in the galaxy would learn what happened here. They would learn what humanity was capable of when pushed to the edge. They would learn that some species did not fight by the old rules. Some species fought to win, regardless of the cost. Chen stood on the bridge of the Indomitable, looking at the tactical display. Where 300 red icons had been, there was now nothing but debris fields and fading energy signatures. The space around the pulsar had been transformed into a graveyard. One of the largest naval battles in galactic history had just ended, and it had been completely one-sided. Rodriguez stood beside her, his face pale. He had never commanded in a battle this large before. None of them had. The sheer scale of destruction was overwhelming. Thousands of beings had died in the last few hours, possibly tens of thousands, all because humans had been given permission to fight the way they knew how. Without restraint, without mercy, with nothing but the cold mathematics of survival. The communications officer reported that coalition observers were requesting permission to approach. They wanted to assess the damage. To confirm the results, Chen granted permission. Let them come. Let them see what humanity had wrought. Let them understand that Earth was not playing at war. This was what humans did when their survival was threatened. This was what evolution on a hostile world had created. Chen activated the fleet-wide channel one final time. She thanked her crews for their courage and sacrifice. She told them they had saved billions of lives. They had protected the coalition when no one else could. They had proven that humanity deserved a place among the stars. But she did not tell them that the hardest part was yet to come. Now they had to return to civilization and explain what they had done. Now they had to face the galaxy and accept whatever judgment came. The battle was over, but the consequences were just beginning. The Coalition Council chambers had never been this quiet. Every representative sat in stunned silence, watching the holographic playback of the battle. The recordings came from multiple sources: human combat footage, Coalition observer vessels, even some data recovered from Velcros wreckage. All of it told the same story. In just over 4 hours, humanity had accomplished what the Coalition thought impossible. High Counselor Vreth watched the final moments again. The destruction of the Velcros flagship, the systematic elimination of every remaining vessel, the cold precision with which human ships hunted down those trying to escape. He had witnessed countless battles in his long life. He had seen civilizations rise and fall, but he had never seen anything like this. This was not warfare as the galaxy understood it. This was extermination. Ambassador Kreltok spoke first. His voice was barely above a whisper. The humans had saved them. The Velcros fleet would have reached Coalition space within days. Billions would have died. Core worlds would have fallen. Entire civilizations would have been enslaved or destroyed. But instead, the threat was gone. Completely eliminated. Not a single Velcros ship remained. Not one survivor to warn their homeworld what had happened. But at what cost? Commander Zalneth pulled up detailed analyses of human tactics. The kinetic strikes had been launched hours before the fleet arrived. That meant humanity had committed to total war before even seeing the enemy. No opportunity for negotiation. No chance for the Velcros to surrender. Just death falling from the sky without warning or mercy. The cyber warfare was even more disturbing. Human electronic warfare specialists had turned Velcro ships against each other, made them fire on their own vessels, corrupted their systems so thoroughly that many crews died in panic and confusion, not even understanding they were under attack. This was psychological torture combined with technological violation. It went against every principle of honorable combat. And then there was the final phase. The systematic hunting of fleeing vessels, ships that were clearly trying to escape, that posed no further threat, that might have been carrying civilians. Human forces had tracked them all down and destroyed them. No quarter given, no prisoners taken. Complete and total annihilation. It was effective. It had achieved the stated objective. But it was terrifying. A junior counselor from the Meridian Collective asked the question everyone was thinking. What kind of species fights this way? What kind of civilization developed such brutal efficiency and destruction? The humans had not hesitated. They had not shown mercy. They had not even given their enemies a chance to see them coming. They had simply appeared and killed everything in front of them. Breath pulled up humanity's file. The Council kept detailed records on every member species. Earth's history was well documented. Continuous warfare spanning millennia. Nuclear weapons used in anger. Biological warfare. Chemical weapons. Entire populations slaughtered in ethnic conflicts, genocides, world wars. Resource wars. The list went on and on. Humanity had been fighting itself with increasing sophistication for its entire recorded history. But the Council had dismissed these as growing pains. All species went through violent phases during their development. Most grew out of it. Most learned to channel aggression into productive endeavors. Most developed philosophical frameworks that valued peace over conquest. Humanity had seemed to be following that same path. They had unified their world, ended their wars, focused on exploration and advancement. The Council had thought they were evolving beyond their violent past. This battle proved otherwise. Humanity had not evolved beyond violence. They had simply refined it, made it more efficient, more devastating, more absolute. They had taken thousands of years of combat experience and distilled it into pure tactical brutality, and they had done it while maintaining perfect discipline, perfect coordination, perfect execution of a plan that most species would consider monstrous. The chamber doors opened. Admiral Chen entered, flanked by Commander Rodriguez and 2 human Marines. She wore her dress uniform, freshly cleaned despite having spent the last day in a damaged warship. Her expression was neutral, professional. She showed no pride in her victory, no remorse for the deaths she had caused, just calm acceptance of what had been necessary. Chen stood at the center of the chamber exactly where she had stood a week ago when volunteering for this mission. The Council had expected her to fail, to die trying to complete an impossible task. Instead, she had succeeded beyond anyone's wildest expectations. The Velcros fleet was gone. The threat to Coalition space was eliminated. Humanity had delivered exactly what was promised. Total victory. Vreth broke the silence. He asked Chen to explain her tactics. Why the kinetic bombardment? Why the cyber warfare? Why the refusal to accept surrender? Why the systematic destruction of fleeing vessels? Chen's answer was simple and direct. Because those tactics won. Because anything less would have allowed the Velcros to regroup, to adapt, to prepare for human methods. The only way to ensure victory was to ensure complete destruction. Kreltok leaned forward. But surely some mercy could have been shown. Surely not every single Velcros needed to die. Chen met his gaze steadily. She asked if he remembered Andromeda Station. 2 million civilians killed without warning. No mercy shown there. No opportunity to surrender. The Velcros had established the rules of engagement. Humanity had simply followed them. More than that, Chen continued, mercy would have been a strategic mistake. If even one Velcro ship had escaped, their people would have learned about human tactics. Future enemies would prepare countermeasures. The element of surprise would be lost. But now the Velcro's dominion knew nothing. They would receive no warning. No intelligence? Just silence where their fleet used to be. When they finally sent scouts to investigate, they would find only debris and unanswered questions. Zalneth stood abruptly. This was unconscionable. Chen was describing warfare as pure calculation, as if lives were just numbers in an equation. Where was the honor? Where was the respect for opponents? Where was the basic decency that separated civilization from barbarism? Chen turned to face him. Her expression hardened slightly. She asked a simple question. Did the 2 million dead at Andromeda Station receive honor? Did the Velcros show respect? Did they demonstrate decency? The council chamber erupted in arguments. Some representatives supported Chen's position. The Velcros had violated every convention of warfare. They deserved no mercy. Others insisted that coalition values must be maintained regardless of enemy actions. That becoming monsters to fight monsters served no one. That there had to be lines that civilized beings would not cross. Chen waited for the noise to die down. Then she spoke again, her voice cutting through the remaining murmurs. The council had a choice to make. They could cling to their values and watch civilizations burn, or they could accept that some threats required extreme measures. Humanity had made their choice. They would do whatever was necessary to protect innocent lives. If that made them monsters in the eyes of the galaxy, so be it. Better to be a living monster than a dead saint. Vreth raised a hand for silence. The debate could continue later. For now, there were practical matters to address. The Velcros Dominion still existed. Their homeworld and colonies remained intact. When they learned their fleet was destroyed, they would respond. Possibly with another attack. Possibly with attempts at negotiation. Either way, the coalition needed to be prepared. He asked Chen what humanity recommended. Chen's recommendation was direct. Send a message to the Velcros government. Inform them that their fleet attacked coalition space and was destroyed defending against that aggression. Offer peace terms. Fair terms. But make it clear that any future aggression would be met with the same response. And mean it. The galaxy needed to understand that total war would be answered with total destruction, that violations of civilized norms would result in consequences beyond imagination. Kreltok asked about humanity's role going forward. Would Earth want permanent military command? Would they seek to dominate coalition defense strategy? Chen shook her head. Humanity had no interest in controlling the coalition. They simply wanted to be taken seriously, to be recognized as equals rather than primitive newcomers, to have their methods acknowledged as valid, even if those methods made others uncomfortable. Rodriguez stepped forward and added his perspective. Humanity understood that their approach to warfare disturbed other species. It disturbed humans too. No sane person enjoyed killing on such a massive scale. But Earth had learned hard lessons throughout its history. When facing extinction, morality became a luxury few could afford. Survival required pragmatism, required doing things that would haunt you later. But at least you survived to be haunted. The council took a recess. Representatives needed time to process what they had witnessed. Time to consult with their governments. Time to decide how to respond to this new reality. Humanity was no longer the primitive species they could dismiss. Earth had proven itself capable of decisive action on a scale that shocked the galaxy. The question now was whether that capability made them valuable allies or dangerous threats. During the recess, Chen and Rodriguez waited in an anteroom. Other human officers joined them. Captain Mills from the Princeton, looking exhausted but satisfied. Commander Park from the Seoul, mourning the loss of his ship but proud of his crew's sacrifice. Lieutenant Chen, no relation to the Admiral, recovering from injuries sustained when the Berlin was damaged. They had all survived. They had all contributed to the victory, and they all carried the weight of what they had done. Mills spoke quietly. She had destroyed multiple Velcros vessels, watched them break apart, seen escape pods launching. She knew there were beings in those pods, individuals with families, dreams, lives, but she had followed orders, tracked them down, made sure none escaped. It would take time to process that. Time to accept what she had become. But she would carry that burden because it meant billions of others would not have to. Chen listened to her officers, heard their doubts and guilt. She felt the same things. Command did not shield you from the moral weight of your decisions. If anything, it made that weight heavier. She had ordered the deaths of thousands, perhaps tens of thousands, not in hot blood or blind rage, but with cold calculation, because it was necessary, because it achieved the objective, because it protected those she was sworn to defend. The recess ended. The council reconvened. Representatives took their positions, looking grave and troubled. Vreth stood to deliver their decision. After considerable debate, the council had reached a consensus. Humanity would be offered a permanent seat on the Coalition Security Council. Earth's military forces would be integrated into coalition defense planning. Human tactical doctrine would be studied and, where appropriate, adopted. But there would be conditions. Human forces would operate under coalition oversight. Certain weapons would be restricted to specific scenarios. Cyber warfare capabilities would be regulated. Humanity's more extreme tactics would be reserved for situations of existential threat. The galaxy acknowledged Earth's effectiveness, but it also recognized the danger of normalizing such brutal methods. Chen accepted these terms without argument. She had expected restrictions. Humanity's demonstration of force had been necessary, but it had also been frightening. Other species needed reassurance that Earth would not become the next Velcros dominion, that humans could be trusted with power, that they would use their capabilities responsibly, even if their definition of responsible differed from galactic norms. Kreltok approached Chen after the formal proceedings concluded. He told her that he had been wrong to dismiss humanity. Earth's people had saved the coalition when no one else could. They had accomplished the impossible. But he had one question. Was Chen proud of what she had done? Did she consider the battle a triumph? Chen considered her answer carefully. Pride was not the right word. She had done her duty, protected innocent lives, eliminated a threat to galactic peace. But the cost had been enormous. Thousands dead on both sides. Technologies and tactics that could never be forgotten would forever change how wars were fought. Humanity had shown the galaxy its true face, and that face would never be seen the same way again. No, Chen replied. Not proud. Satisfied, perhaps. Relieved that it was over. But not proud. Pride implied joy in achievement. What she felt was closer to grim acceptance. They had done what needed doing. They had crossed lines that most species would not even approach, and they would live with the consequences. That was the price of survival. That was what it meant to be human. Kreltok nodded slowly. He understood, or at least he tried to. His species had never faced existential threat. They had never been forced to choose between morality and survival. They had never learned to do terrible things with clear conscience. But humanity had. Earth's entire history was a lesson in making hard choices, in doing what was necessary, regardless of the cost to one's soul. As Chen left the council chambers for the final time, she looked back at the assembled representatives. They were afraid of her. She could see it in their body language, hear it in their voices. Humanity had become something to be feared. Not hated, not despised, but feared. Respected and feared in equal measure. That was not what Earth had wanted when joining the galactic community, but it was what circumstances had demanded. The galaxy would never forget what happened in the outer reaches. The battle would be studied by military academies for generations. Human tactics would be analyzed, debated, sometimes condemned, but they would also be acknowledged as effective, as necessary, as the price that had to be paid when facing an enemy who refused to follow civilized rules. Humanity had changed the galaxy's understanding of warfare, and in doing so they had changed their own place in it. They were no longer the primitives seeking acceptance. They were the predators who had proven their fangs, and the galaxy would never make the mistake of underestimating them again. 3 months had passed since the battle in the outer reaches. Admiral Chen stood in her office aboard the orbital station above Earth, looking down at the blue and white sphere that had birthed humanity. From this distance it looked peaceful, beautiful. It was hard to imagine that this world had produced a species capable of such systematic violence. But Earth had never been about appearance. It had always been about survival. Reports covered her desk. Intelligence assessments from across coalition space. The Velcros Dominion had sued for peace immediately after learning of their fleet's destruction. They had offered full reparations for Andromeda Station. They had agreed to disarmament protocols and coalition oversight. The threat that had terrorized the galaxy for 3 decades had collapsed in a single day. Not because they were defeated militarily, but because they were terrified. Other reports detailed reactions from various galactic civilizations. Most expressed gratitude mixed with concern. Humanity had saved them, yes, but in doing so, had revealed capabilities that made everyone nervous. Coalition intelligence agencies were scrambling to assess Earth's full military potential. What other weapons did humans possess? What other tactics had they developed? How far would they go if truly threatened? Chen had spent weeks in debriefings. Military analysts wanted to understand every aspect of the battle. Politicians wanted to know if such tactics would be used again. Ethicists wanted to discuss the moral implications of total war. Everyone had questions. Everyone wanted reassurance that humanity would not become the next galactic threat. Chen had given them all the same answer. Humans fought to survive. As long as Earth was not threatened, neither was anyone else. But she knew the truth was more complex. Humanity had changed, not just in how others perceived them, but in how they perceived themselves. Before the battle, humans had been eager to prove themselves worthy of galactic civilization, to show they could be peaceful, cooperative, valuable members of the coalition. Now that illusion was gone. Everyone knew what humans were capable of. And more importantly, humans knew it too. Her door chimed. Commander Rodriguez entered, carrying more data tablets. He looked older than he had 3 months ago. They all did. War aged people in ways that time alone could not. He reported that the memorial service for fallen crew members would begin in an hour. Chen nodded. She had attended too many such services in her career. But these felt different. These deaths had achieved something, had meaning. But meaning did not make them easier to bear. Rodriguez sat down without being invited. They had worked together long enough for such informality. He asked Chen if she ever regretted accepting the mission, if she wished the council had sent someone else to face the Velcros. Chen considered the question. Regret was a luxury. The mission had been necessary. Someone had to do it. If not her, then another human commander would have made the same choices, carried the same burdens. But Rodriguez was asking something deeper. Not whether she regretted the mission, but whether she regretted what humanity had become because of it. Chen admitted she did not have a good answer. Humans had always been capable of extraordinary violence. Earth's history proved that. But for 30 years they had pretended otherwise. They had tried to be something they were not. The battle had simply removed the pretense, revealed the truth. Was that better or worse? She did not know. Rodriguez shared his own thoughts. He had been having nightmares, dreams where Velcro ships exploded over and over, where he heard transmissions from dying crews begging for mercy that never came. He knew those deaths were necessary, knew the mission required complete destruction, but necessity did not erase memory, did not silence the voices of those he had killed. He wondered if he would ever stop hearing them. Chen told him honestly that he probably would not. The price of command was carrying the weight of decisions that others could not understand. Every person who died following your orders stayed with you. Every hard choice left scars. But those scars were proof that you still had a conscience, still cared about the cost of victory. The day those voices stopped bothering you was the day you became truly dangerous. Rodriguez appreciated her honesty, even if it was not comforting. A priority message arrived. High Counselor Vreth was requesting a meeting. Chen and Rodriguez made their way to the communication center, where a holographic projection of the crystalline alien appeared. Vreth's form was dimmer than usual, suggesting fatigue or stress. He informed them that several coalition members had submitted formal requests for human military advisors. They wanted to learn from Earth's tactics, wanted to understand how humanity approached warfare. Chen asked if this was wise. Teaching other species how to fight like humans could be dangerous. What happened when those species decided to use those methods against each other, or worse, against Earth? Vreth acknowledged the concern, but the alternative was worse. The galaxy had seen what happened when civilized warfare met uncivilized opponents. The Velcros had exploited every weakness in coalition doctrine. Future enemies would do the same unless the coalition adapted. More than that, Vreth continued, the galaxy needed to understand that humans were not unique in their capacity for violence. Every species had that capacity. Most had simply never been forced to develop it. Earth's hostile environment had made humans specialists in survival. But any species could learn those skills if properly motivated. The question was whether they would learn from humanity's example or repeat humanity's mistakes. Chen agreed to provide military advisors, but with conditions. Human doctrine would be taught as a last resort, not a first choice. Other species needed to understand that total war came with terrible costs, that it should only be employed when survival was truly at stake, that once you crossed certain lines you could never fully return. War had to remain something to be avoided, not embraced. Violence had to be a tool of necessity, not preference. Vreth accepted these conditions. He admitted that the Council had learned a valuable lesson. They had dismissed humanity because of differences in technology and culture. They had failed to recognize that different did not mean inferior. That alternative approaches had value. That newcomers to galactic civilization might have insights that ancient species had forgotten. The Council would not make that mistake again. Every species would be evaluated on capabilities, not assumptions. After the communication ended, Rodriguez asked Chen what she thought humanity's role would be going forward. Would Earth become the Coalition's military specialists, the ones called upon whenever force was needed? Chen hoped not. That would be a dangerous path. It would encourage others to rely on human violence rather than preventing conflicts in the first place. Humanity needed to be a deterrent, not a weapon. A last line of defense, not a first resort. But she also recognized reality. The galaxy had seen what humans could do. That knowledge could not be erased. Other species would always remember the battle in the outer reaches. Would always know that somewhere in Coalition space was a species willing and able to wage total war. That knowledge would influence every interaction, every negotiation, every diplomatic calculation. Earth had become the galaxy's apex predator, whether they wanted that role or not. The memorial service was held in the main hangar bay. Thousands attended both in person and via holographic link. Chen stood at the podium, looking at the names displayed behind her. Over 15,000 humans had died in the battle. Each name represented someone's child, parent, friend, lover. Each one had volunteered knowing the risks. Each one had believed the mission was worth their life. Chen's job was to make sure their faith was justified. She did not give a traditional speech, did not talk about glory or honor or sacrifice. Instead, she spoke truth. These people had died doing something terrible and necessary. They had killed and been killed to protect billions who would never know their names. They had crossed moral lines that most beings would never approach. And they had done it willingly because someone had to, and they chose to be the ones. That was humanity's burden, Chen told the assembled mourners. Not that humans were inherently violent or cruel, but that they were willing to do what others could not, to make choices that would haunt them forever, to sacrifice not just their lives but their peace of mind. That willingness was what made humanity valuable to the Coalition. But it was also what made them dangerous. The line between protector and predator was thin. Vigilance was required to stay on the right side. She concluded by asking everyone present to remember why the battle was fought. Not for conquest or glory, not to prove humanity's superiority, but to protect innocent lives, to stop an aggressor who threatened galactic peace, to demonstrate that violations of civilized norms would have consequences. As long as Earth remembered these reasons, as long as violence remained a tool rather than a goal, humanity could be trusted with power. After the service, Chen returned to her office. She pulled up star charts showing Coalition space. Thousands of inhabited worlds, trillions of beings going about their lives in peace. 3 months ago, all of that had been threatened. Now it was safe. Because 47 human ships and their crews had been willing to do terrible things. That trade seemed fair. Moral calculus on a scale most beings would never have to consider. A message from Earth arrived. President Martinez wanted to discuss future military commitments. How many ships should humanity maintain? What level of readiness was appropriate? How should Earth balance its role as coalition protector, with its desire to be seen as more than just warriors? Chen sent a reply suggesting they meet in person. These were conversations that needed to happen face to face, where nuance and context could not be lost in transmission. She looked out her office viewport at Earth one more time. From this distance, you could not see the cities or the spaceports or the military installations, just clouds and oceans and continents. A beautiful world that had produced a beautiful and terrible species. Chen wondered what humans would become over the next century. Would they remain the galaxy's guards? Would they find ways to transcend their violent nature? Or would they succumb to it, becoming the very thing they had fought against? The answer would depend on choices made in moments like this, on leaders who understood the weight of power, on citizens who questioned authority, on a culture that valued peace even while maintaining the capacity for war. Earth had proven it could fight when necessary. Now it needed to prove it could exercise restraint when fighting was not necessary. That second test might be harder than the first. Rodriguez appeared in her doorway again. He had received word that several younger officers wanted to request transfers to diplomatic service. They had seen enough combat, wanted to use their experience to prevent future conflicts rather than fight them. Chen approved immediately. Humanity needed people like that. Warriors who understood war well enough to know it should be avoided. Survivors who could teach others how to survive without resorting to violence. Perhaps that would be humanity's greatest contribution to galactic civilization, not showing them how to fight more effectively, but showing them why fighting should be a last resort. Teaching through example that victory in war came with costs that no amount of territory or resources could justify. Using Earth's violent history as a cautionary tale rather than an instruction manual. That would be a legacy worth creating. Chen pulled up one final report. Coalition intelligence had detected several potentially hostile civilizations on the far edges of known space. They were watching humanity carefully, trying to assess whether Earth represented a threat or an opportunity. Their evaluation would determine whether they chose cooperation or conflict. Humanity's actions over the coming years would shape that decision. The burden of being the galaxy's apex predator was not just having the strength to fight. It was having the wisdom to know when not to fight. The discipline to restrain power even when using it would be easier. The courage to choose peace when war was possible. These were harder than any battle. Required more strength than any weapon could provide. But they were essential if humanity wanted to be more than just another violent species. Rodriguez asked Chen if she thought humanity was up to the challenge. If Earth could really balance being powerful protectors and peaceful citizens. Chen admitted she did not know. Humans had surprised everyone, including themselves, with what they accomplished in the outer reaches. Maybe they would surprise everyone again by proving that strength did not require cruelty, that capability for violence did not mandate its use, that the best warriors were those who fought only when all other options were exhausted. Time would tell. The battle was over. The immediate threat was eliminated. But the real test was just beginning. Could humanity maintain its edge without becoming the monster others feared? Could they remain vigilant without becoming paranoid? Could they protect without dominating? These questions did not have easy answers. Perhaps they had no final answers at all. Just choices made daily, moment by moment, person by person. Chen stood and prepared to return to Earth. She had meetings to attend. Reports to file. Decisions to make about humanity's future role in galactic affairs. But first she would visit the memorial wall one more time. Look at those names. Remember what they sacrificed. Remember why it mattered. Those memories would keep her grounded. Keep her focused on what truly mattered. Not power or prestige or galactic influence, but the simple goal that had driven humanity from the beginning. Survival. Not just for Earth, but for everyone under their protection. As she walked through the station, crew members stopped to salute. Some looked at her with admiration. Others with something closer to awe. A few with what might have been fear. Chen accepted all of it. She had become a symbol of humanity's capability for organized violence. A reminder that humans could be as dangerous as they were brave. That role was uncomfortable. But someone had to bear it. Someone had to show the galaxy that mercy had limits. That peace could only exist when predators chose restraint. The shuttle to Earth was ready. Chen boarded with Rodriguez and several staff members. As the vessel descended through the atmosphere, she watched her homeworld grow larger. Cities appeared, oceans and mountains and forests. This was what they had fought for. What 15,000 humans had died protecting, not abstract concepts like honor or glory, but real places where real people lived real lives. That was worth any cost, any burden, any moral compromise. The shuttle landed at military headquarters. Chen was greeted by honor guards and officials. Ceremonies were performed. Awards were distributed. Speeches were made about humanity's courage and capability. Through it all, Chen maintained her composure, accepted praise with appropriate humility. But inside, she was thinking about the Velcros, about the thousands who died in the outer reaches, about whether history would judge her actions as necessary or monstrous. Eventually, the ceremonies ended. Chen was alone in her quarters looking at Earth through a window. Rodriguez's question echoed in her mind. What would humanity become? The answer depended on choices not yet made, on challenges not yet faced, on whether humans could maintain their humanity, even while acknowledging their capacity for inhumanity. It was a paradox with no easy resolution, but Chen had faith. Not blind optimism, but earned trust. Humanity had survived ice ages and plagues and wars and near extinction. They had adapted to every challenge Earth threw at them. They had learned from mistakes, however slowly. They had built civilizations and then rebuilt them when they fell. If any species could walk the narrow path between protector and predator, it was humans. They had the experience, the discipline, the moral flexibility to do terrible things for good reasons. Now they just needed the wisdom to know when those reasons were real and when they were excuses. The galaxy was watching. History was watching. And humanity would prove one choice at a time whether they deserved the power they had claimed. The opposition had ceased to be. Now came the harder part, living with what that required. Building something better from the ashes, proving that the galaxy's newest apex predator could also be its greatest guardian. That was the real test. And it had only just begun.